Have a look at animating these assets. And what I'm actually going to do for animating this, I do want to show you really briefly how animating in a timeline works. I'm going to just click on this Doritos text, and this little eye symbol is going to make it visible or not. And I can actually animate this. I'm going to turn off the video background for now and show you. So hopefully you can sort of see where it is there. It's in white. What I might do is just create a empty layer underneath, and this is purely for demonstration so you can see what's going on. I'm going to delete this black background in the end anyway. So this is just to show you one of the crucial steps that we need to do when we are animating in Photoshop. So I'm selected on the Doritos text. I'm in the timeline. There's a little drop down button on the left hand side. So selecting that, you'll notice there's three main animation options here: position, opacity, and style. Now Photoshop has a number of different types of layers, the two main ones being a raster layer and the other one is a smart object. Now the big difference between the two is a raster layer can be destroyed, it can be painted on, it can be erased, all that kind of thing, but anything you do to it, it has no recollection of its previous state except if you go backwards, so Control or Command Z and go back in history, thereby undoing whatever you've done to it. A smart object, however, has a lot of in-depth things that we can do to it. It will remember things. If you add a filter to it, you can adjust the filter. If you reduce the size of it and then increase the size later on, it will maintain its original resolution. So it remembers things from the moment it's turned into a smart object. And all that being said, there's also a few things important in animating. So at the moment, this Doritos text is not a smart object. It's a raster layer, and I have position here. Now I can actually click on the stopwatch for this, create a keyframe, move my timeline, and I can move my Doritos text, and it will automatically drop in a keyframe now that I've hit the stopwatch. And as you can see, if I slide that, that will animate it. And that's not terrible, that's okay. That's a slight bit of movement left or right. But the position will only allow us to move that text either up, down, left or right. So anywhere we're moving it in X and Y axis that's all it's going to allow us to do. What it won't allow us to do is if I hit Command or Control T, if you're on a PC or Mac, bring up the transformation controls, which by the way you can access by going to Edit, Free Transform, and if I rotate that or if I scale that and apply, that will not place a keyframe in there, and it will just constantly be in that shape. So I can't actually increase the scale of it, which is something I need to do. So I'm going to undo that, bring it back to play. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to convert it to a smart object. So I'm going to go to the layer here, and in this main area here I'm going to right click and go to convert to smart object. As soon as I do that, the smart object icon appears here, and you may even see it in your timeline as well. And when I go to the drop down, it's changed from position to transform. And now what I can actually do is put in a keyframe, move it, and I can go Control T. And by the way, I'm making sure that I have my aspect ratios of width and height locked in. What you don't want to do is you don't want to stretch your text unless you mean to intentionally. It just looks really, just doesn't look professional in most cases. But I can rotate this, I can scale it, and as soon as I press enter to apply, we'll now see that it will rotate and scale and do whatever we want to do, and you can do some really funky things. And just to make life really more interesting, you can also right click when you're transforming and go to things like warp, for example, and you can warp out, and as you can see we can even warp out text, but it's going to do some really funky things to that. So just be very cautious with that sort of thing. I'm going to delete those keyframes, and let's see if we can step back to the original. Great, and turn off my stopwatch. So we're going to keep this relatively simple. I'm going to bring up my video again, and I'm going to bring that video, allow that video to start playing, and I need to delete this black layer, just that demo layer that I've done, and I'm going to start bringing the animation in. So I just want to get that animation popping, and you can see that Doritos is just coming out of the darkness. So I'm going to get that back to where I can just start seeing the shape of the text, and bring up my Doritos text, and I'm going to go to the opacity here, and I'm going to lower that opacity so I can sort of start seeing what is behind there. I want to be able to see it, but I also want to see where it lines up. Now, another thing you're going to notice is you're going to start seeing, if you start seeing these pink lines popping up when you start moving things, this is typically based on having the snaps available, and it can be quite annoying because it's going to try and lock itself into certain things. So do turn that off if you can. Go to view and turn off snap if it's on. Just turn that off. And I'm going to transform this and try and get it to scale. So I'm going to go Control T, and once again, if you don't have the aspect ratio between the width and the height locked by default, depends on which version of Photoshop in 2020 it is by default it is on, you may need to press Shift to scale. So just be aware of that if it starts doing that. I'm just going to move this around, and don't forget you can also nudge. So use your arrow keys on your keyboard to push single frame left or right. And once we get close enough, that's pretty good, and hit apply or hit enter. Now I'm actually going to bring this back just a little bit. I'm going to take this back to the beginning of the animation, and I'm going to lock that in. And the reason for that is I don't want it sitting there doing nothing latently until a few frames in, and then it starts moving, just in case that when my effects and that are applied, it's still visible. So it's just going to be in motion until it gets to the end. Alright, I'm going to scrub through, and I'm going to try and figure out where it stops moving. So you may wish to turn the visibility off, and I'm going to guess probably about this point here, about the 1 second 20 frame mark, and that's where about sort of the main animation stops. So I'm going to bring my text back. Let's bring my opacity up so I can see it a bit better now, and I'm going to transform that again and move and scale. And this is mainly based on the white of the text. So the one in the actual video does have a stroke on it, or a couple of strokes, got a black and a red stroke to it, and it's also got some effects and stuff going through it. So do try and get it relatively close if you can to that central part. A little bit of finessing. Tap tap. And I think that's getting pretty close. That should be good. And once again, apply. And because I've got that transformation on, it should now scale nicely. So if we turn the video off, you should be able to see that that is now just a slight bit of movement, and away we go. While we're there, I'm going to, if you press Shift, it's going to help lock into a keyframe or the end of a layer there. While we're there, let's do the Doritos, and we've done the Doritos, let's do the for the bold. So remember, convert to a smart object, right click, convert to smart object, so we can actually scale it up or down. Let's make the visibility for our video group done, and I'm going to move and transform that. So let's make sure we're on the correct layer. Control T, transform, and let's scale that and move and try and get it to basically fit what we need. Now this isn't the exact font that was being used for the ad, so we are taking some liberties here for that, but found the location, great. For the bold, let's activate the transformation, and we're actually going to work backwards for this. So as you can see, as I scrub backwards, get an idea of where that is. Once again, lower that opacity just for helping us work, and transform. Don't forget to zoom in, Control plus or Control minus to zoom back out, and space bar to allow us to move around, and we can start getting that kind of happening. Alright, I think that's pretty close right there. Now let's bring the opacity back up. There's my keyframe, and I'm just going to shuffle that to right to the beginning, so it's going to be slightly better, slightly different, but you know, we're getting there. I might just move that out just a little bit more. There we go. Now you don't want to make too many keyframes unless you can, if you can avoid that, just simple movements at this point, and away we go. So get our text moving, and they pop in and stop. Great. All right, let's minimize that. Those two are ready to go. Don't forget to save incrementally. You know, the last thing you want to do is do a big mess up and not save everything. All right, next part, our triangles. Now, our triangles, let's get these into position as well. So let's scrub through to a position where our triangle, which is basically the end of the scene here, has formed from our sting that we're going to copy. And let's transform and scale that. Once again, make sure you just lock in those width and height scales. And I'm going to start shrinking this and adjusting to try and get that to match as close as possible. Alright, we're getting there. And let's do a bit of nudging. This one's being a little bit of a menace for me, but you know, in the end we'll figure it. I'm just looking for reference points. Go and apply. And I'm actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the actual Doritos text that we're using as a placeholder, just to try and get that to sort of match up. And I think that's pretty close like that. So we are eventually going to get rid of this video completely, and we're going to just rely on the assets that we have bought in. Okay, so now we've got the triangle there. The triangle doesn't actually animate as such. It's got some animation particles and stuff on it. If we look at the video there, we can see we've got all sorts of flames and weird funky things going through it. And you know, we can do some really cool stuff with that at a later point as well. But at this point, we actually just want to get this triangle appearing similar to what we want in the video. So this next step, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a mask, and we're going to animate the mask, and we're going to do it in 3 separate components. So we'll do that in the next video.